first-time founders and visionaries, they have huge difficulties to let go because they're always afraid that, you, excuse my French, to fuck up their product, right?
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Boris, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure for me as well. Thank you, Sylvan.
You're a serial entrepreneur and startup CEO based here in Zurich in Switzerland. And before we're going to talk about your impressive learnings, I want to start with your personal background. Your university path was not a traditional one. You actually spent a total of 2 years there, according to your LinkedIn profile. Would you say that higher education is overrated when it comes to entrepreneurship?
I don't know if probably 2 years is even a bit a lie because I haven't been there a lot, I guess, at the university. So, no, I guess for me it was a bit, probably the path was a bit different because I started my first, probably not company, but product or project back in the 90s already. So while I was studying, and I had the chance to, just leave university and start my business back then because I sold this company or this project to a big FMCG company. So when they offered me the chance to work with them for a couple of projects, basically back then it was all around internet, like the early 2000s. So everybody wanted to be in the internet. So I helped them to shape their communication. So it was a great chance. And the idea was basically to leave the university for a couple of years and then go back. But that obviously never happened because I led this company over 10 years. So there was no chance to get back then afterwards. I got addicted to entrepreneurship. But back to your question, if it's overrated, I guess it gives you a good background. Right. So it helps you to understand like the economics behind it, psychology or whatsoever. But it doesn't make you an entrepreneur, obviously. Right. But what I see is that, especially when it comes to business school, they have more and more focus on real entrepreneurship, not just, they don't just teach economics. Mm-hmm. For example, I'm a guest speaker at the IMD in Lausanne. So I work closely with students and see actually how they appreciate it. Like it's an interesting topic, and I guess times are changing a bit, right? So it's getting it, or people realize that it's really interesting, right? Even though they don't want to be an entrepreneur probably, but they have an interest for this topic.
But in that regard, you would say you become an entrepreneur by doing, not by studying it to a certain degree. Yeah,
I would say, I guess it's something that you either already know from mm-hmm. your background, your family, right? I know lots of people who come from an entrepreneurial family or have an entrepreneurial background. And those have a much easier start than I had because my parents are teachers. So, far away from entrepreneurship doesn't even exist, right? So yes, I had to learn it in my case on my own, and it was hard learning. So it was I did a lot of failures and learned the hard way, basically.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about these learnings. But you just mentioned your parents were teachers. So where does your entrepreneurial drive then come from? Was there anyone else who motivated you to become an entrepreneur, or why did you choose that path? Because that's not the logical step as a child of two teachers.
Yeah. So I guess my parents weren't either happy with it. So they always envisioned the guy who goes to university, right, to study something serious. So I guess it was a coincidence. As I mentioned, I started my first thing. I don't know it wasn't a startup, in 1997, I guess. It was actually, the first, party portal with those party pictures in Switzerland. It was really the early days of internet. So no mass media, right? Mm-hmm. So, we're super happy when you had 1,000 people on the page or something like that, right? So it was a funny time, but why we did it, right? It was because we wanted to enter the clubs without paying. We wanted to drink for free and stuff. So that was our passion back then. It was partying. And what I learned, it was basically when you do something for passion, it usually works out. It works well, right? So it was, for that time was was kind of a success, right? And we were able to sell this whole thing to a company. So in that regard, it was a success. So probably just this coincidence that brought me into this world, and I got addicted. And I would say the other thing is as well that I'm a guy who likes to take risk, a guy who likes to take responsibility. So that helps, of course, when it comes to building companies and entrepreneurship in general.
I want to focus on that first company, that first startup. You basically solved your own problem. That's a really strong, starting point, because that also keeps you going a very long time in terms of motivation. Was that one of the key success factors from your perspective that also made it a success in terms of an exit afterwards?
Well, yeah, I solved my problem because I was student and didn't have money to pay the drinks in the club. So I solved my problem, but the product didn't solve this kind of problem. But we saw that there is a need. It was pre-Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. So, and people already like to see their pictures somewhere, right?
Of course.
Back then, I remember there was a magazine, a print magazine called Forecast. And so they did that, right? Yeah. So they printed pictures on paper, right? And people were always waiting. Am I there? Am I there? Am I there? So what we did is just we translated that into the internet, right? And by doing that, of course, that was a certain. Already the idea had a certain virality inside, right? Because people, obviously, they went to the page and want to look if they're there, if we've chosen their pictures. And then if we've chosen their picture, then they would send it to their friends and so forth. So that's always, if you have a virality already in your concept, that always helps, right? And of course, we were passionate about that. So that helped in that regard.
And then when you did the exit, how did that change you? Because certainly you made some money there in that deal. Did that change you in any way? Because you then stopped going to university, right?
Yeah, I have to say it wasn't a big amount of money, right? So it was more like we invested that money into a new organization. So we've built basically this agency / product company, because what we did there is we helped companies with their digital campaigns, but on the other hand, we've built products as well, like a content management system or a shop system or so forth, because that was as well pre-Shopify, pre-WordPress and whatsoever. So there was only very limited products around there. And so we did it on our own, basically. Yep. That was the company about.
What is really fascinating about you is that you see both sides. You build companies your own, but you also became an external startup CEO for other companies, like for CodeCheck, for example, an app that informs customers about products before they actually buy them in 2014. So I wonder, with your founder DNA that we just briefly talked about, with the need of building something, of having and running your own company, why would you decide to become the external CEO of another company?
Well, in that case, if you look back at CodeCheck, by then when I started, the company CodeCheck just, we founded the company CodeCheck. So it was really the early days, right? It was an early stage startup. And in that regard, together with the founder, we've built the whole company, starting then. So before it was basically a product, and then the company started. So I would say that's usually my focus. So I'm the guy who builds the organization, right? Yeah. So I'm not that much of a product guy. And kind of that helps if you look at it like that. I don't think that's a huge difference from a founder to a startup CEO when the startup is pretty much early stage, right? So you still have to the possibility to shape the culture, to influence lots of things like strategy and whatsoever. And so I don't see a big difference, even though talking about this role founder, that's something that is very interesting actually, and I'm working currently a lot with founders. And I guess the most challenging thing about that is founder is not a role, right?
Yeah.
So some of the founders are expert in their topics in certain fields and are probably product people, right? Have a great idea, great vision, build something. And then suddenly they need to build an organization. And I guess that's a huge challenge because you might not be a good leader. You might not be good at talking even to people, right?
Sure, yeah.
Some product people are very introverts. And they have to learn all those kind of things. And I think that's a huge challenge. So it makes sense to partner with somebody and who's probably a bit more experienced in building organization, who went through that a couple of times.
Absolutely.
So that's how I consider my role as CEO. So it's partially founder, partially CEO, right?
What does that mean in terms of, the shares that you hold on a company? Because if you come in a bit later than the original founder or founders, I can imagine you have a pretty tough negotiation stand to say, hey, I will be the CEO, I will help you build that company, but you didn't invent the product. So they are still in love with their baby. And then it can be quite tough to negotiate, okay, we are like founders, but they don't see you as founder because you joined later. How do you solve that issue? I can imagine that's a big challenge.
It's funny that you mentioned baby. I'm always that's always a thing I'm talking to people. You shouldn't consider your startup or your product as your baby, because it's not. It's not your baby. It's a product, right? And you should have that emotional distance to something. And I just, what I see is that, especially founders or visionaries, where that's strongly connected to their vision. Basically, you live in the future. They have difficulties to listen to customers. They have difficulties to get feedback from the team and so forth, because it's their vision, right? So they're so emotionally attached to that, they just cannot compromise on that. And that's why I always think you need to have this distance. You need to listen to people, and you need to be aware that this is your vision, right? It will never happen. It will never happen. So if you want to be successful, hold this vision, right? Which is great, because it's kind of your, it's your goal, your future goal. But be aware that, that you never really get there. Probably get close as possible, but you need to shape your product with the feedback of all those people around you, with the feedback of your customers and so forth. But coming back to your question regarding shares, I must say it wasn't never a big thing actually to these negotiations, and especially when it came to CodeCheck, where it was, as I mentioned, very early stage. So we had no big issues on that. So we found a solution quite quickly. But it's obviously very different. It gets less the later you start, right? So that's something. It's about risk taking, and I totally get that. That if you're already on the right path and you just want to, let's say, add value to the team you have, but it's going to be a success. Obviously, we're not less likely to give tons of shares, right? So, but that's okay. It's okay.
Was there always sort of a target number where you said, I want to have at least 20% or at least 30% for you in order to be, also to have some skin in the game and some motivation to make it big? Or was there never a specific number? It was always case by case decision.
Good question. I guess for me, the shares and the compensation, they were never the number one reason for joining an organization. So it was more, back in these days that, it's really like 7-8 years ago, it was more about having impact, having a product that actually drives you, that you like, so an organization that you like, people you like. So I guess that was probably for me the most important things, and then the rest, compensation, shares, was just like something that you have to find. Obviously, a good deal, but I don't think that I really had some target numbers in mind or whatsoever. It's depending a bit, when you start negotiating, you probably don't really know where the company's at, right? So you do your due diligence, you start understanding, and then it's depending a bit on those numbers as well.
Right. Fair point. Yeah. I also, I'm a big fan of CodeCheck. I even started using it myself regularly. So I think you built a fantastic product there.
Absolutely. It's a great project. I guess it has a product, and I guess it had, a lot of impact on people's life. And I think that counts as well. So all this feedback we've got out from people who really liked it, who changed their life. That's a lot of influence as well on people's life, positive influence. So
exactly.
That obviously doesn't pay your bills, but it's something that drives your motivation. Right?
You know why you get up in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
We also mentioned, you coming in as an external person. Maybe there are not that many employees yet, but at least there's a founding team, maybe the first employees. Now you come in as an external startup CEO. Can it also be a challenge, or was it ever a challenge for you?
It is always a challenge. It is, because as you mentioned, this baby topic, this is probably the biggest challenge, because as a founder, you need to let go. And especially when it comes to, let's say, first-time founders and visionaries, they have huge difficulties to let go, because they're always afraid that, you, excuse my French, to fuck up their product, right? So it's always a challenge to find the right, trade-off between changing something and between still keeping, or for them keeping kind of power to lead. Mm-hmm. And obviously as a CEO you have the responsibility for the whole, right? Yeah. And so the founder role is changing then, right? And probably goes in the product direction. So let's say you're then chief product officer or something like that. But this is the challenge, because, and especially when companies are growing, then the founder doesn't have a space, right? A defined space. So mm-hmm. It's kind of like something that's always changing. If it's a great product person, this is always needed. But probably there is a better product person than coming into the company, and then the founder needs to find something else again. And I guess this is always a bit of a challenge, right? And what I learned as well is, because I made lots of mistakes in my life, and went through lots of things, learned a lot of things. And obviously when you start a company, you have some ideas. You don't have the experience, but you have some ideas how to build it. Mm-hmm. And usually those ideas are not the best ones at the beginning, right? And this is something I experienced. I'm not compromising anymore on best practice, right? So if I start working with a founder, I really say this is the way we should go, right? Because I made this other path. It doesn't work. So I'm not going to do this again and again and again just because you don't believe me, right? Yeah. So, and this is sometimes a challenge to really sell that path as well to people who don't know it, who haven't experienced it yet. To get back to your question, this is a challenge, and I've experienced that. Yeah.
In that regard, when you see, hey, I do have to convince them that there is a better way than what they think of walking down that path right now, is there also a certain way where you then say, hey, I try to convince them, they just don't want to see it? Because then that can make your life really difficult as startup CEO if you have like the internal disagreement that will cost you so much time and energy, and you can't focus on building a successful company. Is there ever a limit where you then say, hey, I tried this and that, it's just not going to work, I have to leave as a CEO? Or how do you deal with that if the founder or the founders just don't want to agree on your way, on your best practices shaped by your numerous experiences?
Yeah, that's the consequence, right? If because your role is, I mean, you have the responsibility for the whole. You have the responsibility for the company, right? And if you see that this is not going to work out, then you either leave or compromise on everything. And I guess compromising on everything just leads to a mediocre organization, right? Yeah. And what happens as well is, especially when founders are leaders and lead in a different direction, then the company gets really into troubles because people just don't know where to go. Right? Probably you have different strategic goals. Imagine how that works, right?
It's like rowing in the different direction.
Exactly, you lose focus and it just stands still.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. So that's then really the point where you need to decide if you want to just if you better leave or not.
And another challenge I briefly want to talk about is when you come in as an external person. You mentioned before, founder is not a position, but it's still a very powerful title. So I can imagine that the acceptance internally with the team that has already been there can be challenging. Did you ever experience anything of that sort, that you came in as the external person, but then people still listened or followed the founder, although you became the CEO and you were responsible for everything?
Not really. No, I don't think. I mean, I'm always as I mentioned, I like to work with founders, and especially when they have a clear role. So when the founder is, for example, the product person, right? And I think then it works because you have your role, you have your responsibilities, and that's then a very natural organization, right? Yeah. But if the founder wants to be the CEO, then this is going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue for the team because obviously the founder has this power, as you mentioned, right? It's the visionary, or can be the visionary for the whole organization. So people would listen to this person, and then it just that thing happens. Actually, you as a company, you just stand still. They might lead, like two people might lead in different towards different goals. So that just wouldn't work out. But usually, what I experience is that I was always welcomed by the teams because one of the things I've learned is to analyze super fast what's working, what's not. So usually I can have impact on pretty early on. So people see, okay, this guy is probably, or adds value kind of, right? So that makes it a bit easier, yeah.
And also just a random follow-up question on that regard. I could imagine that there could also be discussions about a co-CEO role. What do you think about co-CEOs? I personally am not a big fan of that setup, but I just wonder, you have way more experience than I have. So what's your take on co-CEO roles?
I'm not a big fan when it comes to, let's say, those democratic structures in an early stage startup. I think there needs to be one person who makes a decision because sometimes you just need to make decisions super quickly.
Right.
So I think it can work when the organization is bigger and you're basically sailing in really still waters, right? There's no more storms or whatsoever. Then it can work. Then stuff like holacracy can work and everything. But in an early stage startup, I think there needs to be just one CEO, one person who makes the final decision, I would say. And I just had this discussion with a startup I'm currently working with. And I just told them, look, why co-CEO? It's usually because they don't know whom to recruit at this early stage, right? They want to go into fundraising. They think, okay, it's better if there are two people, but it's not. It doesn't make you more credible if there are two people sitting there, right? So it's usually just this one person or this one person and the founder. So that is actually makes you more credible than just hiring someone else, right?
Right.
And especially when it comes to this hiring topic, right? I mean, there's always this question, whom to hire? What kind of team do I actually need now? And I guess that there's as well very important to actually know what kind of competencies you need inside of your organization in order to be successful, right? Yeah. And that should be the question. and not, shall I hire a co-CEO?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. So a very diverse and broad management team can be a strong asset where you have your clear roles, but not a co-CEO. That's more of a weaker sign to a certain degree, because then like it's nobody's responsible, right?
That's a very good point. When it comes to management teams, you mentioned diverse. I would say complementary.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because and that's actually a big issue, right? So people tend to hire people that are like them, so have a bit of the similar personality because they like each other, or they tend to hire people who fit into their management style. Like, let's say if someone has a very strong personality and doesn't like to have something similar inside of the management team, then they tend to hire people with, let's say, may I say weaker personality? It's just, let's say, people are not really speaking up, right?
Yeah, they're more the followers than the leaders.
The followers, exactly. Yeah. So, and that is always something that can actually already lead to failure at the very, very early stage, before you've even started. So that's something to really understand and keep an eye on. And what I always, tell or advise startup is to do an assessment to understand what is actually the personality of the person you want to hire. And that helps, to understand a bit, the mechanics of this process.
Right. What assessment do you recommend there? A Gallup test or?
No, I'm actually working with a guy from. It's a Dutch guy. I don't even know the name of this assessment he does, but it's really, it goes deep into the personality of people, and it just it's about adding strength to your organization. So detecting the strengths one person has, understanding their power zone as well. And the good thing about that assessment is that it gives you a bit of a manual of the personality of your team, basically, or of your management team. It's pretty expensive, so you might not doing it. You might not want to do it with everybody, but with the management, it's actually worth it. So you understand why people act like they do, right? And especially when it comes to, working under pressure, it's good to understand why people suddenly act totally differently, or why they always jump back to certain patterns, right? And to, just start to bring them out of there, because usually, if you work in your power zone, that means you add value to the organization. If you go out of your power zone, that means you could just stick to stuff to patterns right. And that can be an issue.
I like that a lot, because you leverage people's strengths in order to have a stronger and more successful company in the end. I think that's a very powerful understanding. So we're already in the middle of the learnings that you're sharing here. And in October 21, you actually published a LinkedIn article with the 5 things you wish you had known when you started your first company. So I want to tackle them one by one and also discuss them a bit with you, because I think there's so much value lying behind that article. So the first point that you mentioned is don't start without a solid foundation. So what makes a solid foundation from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, let me explain it in that way. I think you need to understand what kind of organization you want to build before you start it, right? So you need to make sure that you really think through it. And that means you should know what kind of values you want to share with your team, what really matters to you as a founder first. You need to understand why you actually do it. So the purpose of your company. And you need to understand what kind of competencies you need in order to build a successful company. So especially when it comes to questions, whom to recruit now. Okay, so you need to understand, okay, is it a tech company, right? And I'm not a tech person, so I need probably a CTO as a first person. Or is it sales or whatever, right? Yep. So you need to understand that, what actually is important to build in your organization. And the next thing is then the goals you have, right? So you need to understand where you want to be at in 10 years, the famous B hack and stuff like that. So this is the path where that leads you to success, right? And especially you need to know that as a leader to lead your team towards a certain goal, because leading without the goal is not leading; it's just leading nowhere, right? Yeah. So that's for me the foundation that you need to build, that influence everything, right? Knowing what kind of organization you want to build or want to shape, that like as well answers a lot of questions when it comes to hiring people. Right, so you want to hire people that share the same values. You want to hire people that like are good at a certain or have certain skills. So in order to shape your competencies of your company, so every single step actually influence like your decisions, and that's what I'm usually starting with as well when I work with startups and scale ups.
It's so powerful because it's like your guiding compass, your navigator to a certain degree.
Exactly. And especially when I'm talking about strategy, for me, strategy is not something very theoretical, right? It's not this 30-pager that you write,
that nobody reads.
Write down and probably never look at it again, right? So for me, I use just one-pagers, like just having the most important thing at the page. You can even print it out and have it always at your side. And use it as a tool, right? Especially when it comes to early stage companies, this will change a lot of times. So it's not something written in stone. I consider really strategy and the core values and so forth as a decision-making framework. Because what usually happens, and this is something you suddenly realize when you start a company, what usually happens is you don't have too few opportunities. You usually have too many.
Yep. And
the challenge is choosing the right ones. And if you know where you want to go at, then you can really decide based on that. And when it comes to partnership, for example, say, okay, does this partnership, it's probably a very shiny one. Let's say, Apple knocks at your door, but okay, no,
it's good.
You're probably going to sell it to Apple then, but but another big brand, right?
Sure.
But it doesn't count in your strategy. It doesn't support your path towards your goal. Then you might want to say no, or you might want to change your strategy. That's another way, right? Another possibility. So having that, this is basically your most important tool as a founder and as a startup leader.
Matthijs Bucchi, the founder of Small PDF, he recently said at one of our founders dinners that if you have a good strategy, it has to always hurt a bit when you have to say no to things. Then it's a good strategy, because you would like to do it, but you have a so good focus that it hurts to say no to that. And I think that's a wonderful summary of that point that you just made.
Absolutely, I like that, and it's the truth. It really hurts sometimes to say no. Yeah. But I always, I always consider it's your big red no button where you can really push it and it says just no. And there is even one. There are some plastic ones, you can buy them, like just to remind you all the time. Just say no, say no, say no.
Put that on your desk and hit it multiple times a day.
Exactly. So, but it sometimes really hurts because. Especially when you're I mentioned this passion and the emotions, like you wanna change the world, right? You want to do it quickly. You want to do it on as many levels as possible, and it suddenly opens a big opportunity over there, which is, let's say you're in B2C, but this would be B2B, and then you just jump over, but suddenly you're just doing two things, but you're not really good at none of those,
exactly. Right? Yeah. It's also, the grass is also always greener on the other side. So whenever you do B2C right now, you always think, B2B would be so much easier. But if you're doing B2B, you would think exactly the same about B2C. It's fascinating.
Absolutely.
You also mentioned the 10-year plan. Do you have a good example of this 10-year goal that you can also communicate with the team?
Yeah.
Like, I could imagine an exit or an IPO might not be the best motivator for the team. So what is a good example there?
No, I think when it comes to a let's say a goal should be measurable, right? So it's not the vision. It's not the fantastic idea you have. It's really a measurable goal, and it can be revenue. For example, Walmart, they just, put a revenue goal. They said in 10 years they want to be there. And it worked out. right? And like if you have something that is measurable, that helps you to then shape the short-term goals as well. So that's just the path how you get there, and suddenly everything gets more realistic. So you don't even need to communicate this BHAG all the time. But for people usually, or for a team, it's good enough to have very clear short-term goals, but understanding that there is a bigger plan, right? So I really say, if you say, okay, communicating your strategy to your team, yes, do it, but don't do it on a daily basis, right?
Right. The other point, the last point I want to address here in your first point that you mentioned in your article is values. What do I do if I don't know my core values yet? Do you have any tips on that?
Yes, you can. I mean, it's usually how I do it with startups. I usually run a workshop, and I start with the founder to just write down his or her personal values, like what really matters to them when they collaborate with people on their day-to-day basis, in their family life and whatsoever, right? Yeah. Because everybody has values and everybody has things that really matter to them. But you usually don't, it's not easy to articulate, right? So you need to think a bit. So what I do is very, very traditional brainstormings with the team and then votings on values, and then just put them into test, right? Have them, write them down. Because when it comes to a startup, to an early stage startup, like a young organization is a bit like a child, right? You don't have the values yet. You don't live the values yet. You learn it. And you build your values over the time. So it's still easy to change. So if you realize that this value doesn't support my decision-making process at all, it probably even harms it, then change it. But suddenly, after a couple of years, you realize, oh, I cannot change them anymore, right?
Exactly.
So people really live them. I hire based on that. So it's something that is really deep into, well, it entered deeply into my organization. It shapes my organization, shapes the culture of my organization. And then that can be an issue as well for an organization. When you take Facebook now, they have this value, or probably it's more competency, of moving fast, right? And, like especially when it comes to all those issues they have currently, it's a lot about moving fast and not thinking enough, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think they call it moving fast and breaking things, right? So they literally do break a couple of things.
They break the whole world currently.
Yeah, but that's interesting. So that's something to be fully aware that this might come back later down the road. It might not be the suitable value anymore, but it's super hard and difficult to change.
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot foresee the future like that. So it might harm your organization afterwards. It's really hard to change it again.
No. Let's talk about the second point that you mentioned in your article. It's called choose your core team wisely. So what makes a strong core team? What roles do you have there? Who should be on the core team?
Well, I cannot. You cannot answer this question in general, because it depends on your product. Depends on the organization you want to shape. Right? But knowing what you need to achieve your goals, what I mentioned, but just mentioned, knowing your competencies that you need to build in your organization, that's already crucial, right? So that's the first step. Understanding that a bit in depth, really thinking of things you need to build, and then you start with defining the roles you need, and the core team. Well, I guess for me, always the most important thing is what I mentioned before, is that people are entering the organization, that they actually add value, and add value as a person, add more strength to the organization. It's not necessarily a skill that they need to add at the beginning, but it's the personality, right? So make it more complete, leadership more complete, basically, or diverse, as you mentioned as well. So hiring for diversity is always as well very good. If you think of hiring, let's say if it's a female founder, hiring a male CTO or whatever, or vice versa, it's a good idea, because usually different genders are have different strengths already, or it's more likely, right? So that you already add some values to the existing team. So that's already something good. And then what I would say as well, what really matters is hiring A players. So being aware of like the possibilities a person has, right? I'm not talking about a great university degree. I'm not talking about like coming from a shiny brand or whatsoever, but having the ability to grow and learn adds much more value to your organization than having a someone with a PhD that just knows everything and stands still, basically, right?
That's so crucial for every startup, really. Some don't get that yet at the beginning, then they make that mistake, and then they realize, oh, that was not a good idea. Yeah. But it's so difficult to understand who is an A player and who is not. How do you test people for that before you hire them? That's probably the $1 million question.
It's a very good thing, right? So I realized that I'm not good at that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I made some very bad decisions when it comes to hiring. Because what I did, let's say, too superficial decisions based on their backgrounds, based on a shiny CV, right? Yeah. I just thought, okay, wow, this is perfect fit for this position. So I thought more not about human being, but about positions and skills and all those kind of things. So I realized that I'm just that's me, right? And I'm probably not this guy who really feels how the person is going to be in future whatsoever. And what I did, I changed the processes of hiring and involved all those kind of people, right? So involved the whole team, for example, into the hiring process. And honestly, I didn't have to fire one single person anymore after this decision. So usually we hired then for cultural fit, I would say, for team fit, right? This is one part of it, but that doesn't make those people A players, right? But I think A players, you like something you see when A players or how A players act in an interview, they are looking for the right place for them. They're not just looking for a job. So you suddenly realize, okay, those people ask you a lot of questions, and why? It's probably because they want to grow, they want to learn, they want to benefit from this position. So there are two ways. One thing is just entering when you have an interview. Opening for the whole interview for discussion more than just asking questions, right?
Right.
And that's what I like. If an interview suddenly gets into a two-way discussion, right? And the other thing is as well, once you shape your culture, and for example, education has a very important place in your organization, that brings in the right people as well, because that's for them, that's a very important argument to decide for that position. If they see, okay, I can learn here, I can benefit from that. I can even teach people, right? That's what we did at my last gig. So we had our brown bag lunches, for example, where people presented stuff. So it was really a big learning culture. And I guess that brings in the right people as well. And of course, the other things that you just need to do is check the references, talk to people, then ask as well, all you want to know, is this person open for feedback? Has this person emphasis on learning, on growing and stuff like that? So, and that would say adds much more value than, the best CV in the world.
Nice. Yeah. Well put. The third point you mentioned in your article is leadership is not a competition. So there you also mentioned that the team skill should be better than your skills. In that case, you wrote my skills. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? What you exactly meant by that statement?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if this happens to lots of people, but it happened to me. when I started my first company. So for me, it was kind of a competition. I want to be better in everything than my team. And, this directly leads to a very mediocre organization because you cannot be good at everything. so that was, one of the things I've learned the hard way. And I learned it actually the hard way when I entered an organization with just 8 players. And I got very frustrated because I thought, shit, what I do here, right?
I can't be the best anymore in everything.
Yeah, I guess they asked them the same thing. What this guy, what? so basically, that taught me quite a brutal lesson. That it's leadership is more about making other people better than being the best.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you let go of that? When you once come from that place where you say, hey, I want to be the best at everything. I want to be the strongest and the best. How do you let go of that? How do you manage that to also then delegate stuff and just let people do maybe a better job than you could yourself?
Yeah. So I guess, and honestly, I guess I really got into kind of a depression, because it was really, for me, it was really a hard lesson, and I had to change everything. And I guess that's where I started for myself to be aware that there's always a better me, always, right? So to be constantly open to learn and just test and new things to always have a coach, for example. So I always have a coach. So I always need someone to talk to, and the coaches change over the time because, I want to be good at something, right? I want to be better at something or challenge something, and then probably the next topic. So I guess this is very important, and then probably this is a bit about entrepreneurship, right? Knowing that you won't stop. There's always a better you.
And, we both love sports. So I think I love the analogies that you can draw between sports and business. But I think here you also have a very significant difference because usually in sports you have a competition and it's a zero-sum game. There's a winner, there's a loser. There's only one winner usually. However, in business, you can have everybody can win. The whole company can win and everybody can be better off. So there's not a zero-sum game. You can actually create more value out of nothing. And once I realized that was like blowing my mind. I was like, wow, this is the way cooler game to play.
Absolutely. And as well, I like, this, like if you think of sports, what I really like at sports, I mean, probably professional athletes are probably the best trained specialists in the world, right? Yeah. Because what they do is they train 90% and then probably just, compete 10% or even less.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
So they train just for this single moment all the time. What we do in our day-to-day life, if we train 10%, then it's already a huge amount of training, right? So I think we should shift that as well a little bit. And what I always think, like stuff like reading, like learning or talking to a coach, getting feedback, I think that needs to enter even the tightest schedule, right?
Exactly. How often and with what kind of coaches do you work yourself?
It's depending a bit on the phase. Sometimes you have a very, like I would say you're heavily focusing on operations, and then it's probably, once a month. And sometimes you have the time where you're building something new. And that's probably once a week. So it's depending a bit, right, on my personal needs as well. Mm-hmm. But it's on a regular basis, I would say. Yeah.
Perfect. Then let's jump to the fourth point you mentioned in your article. Use best practices and stick to them. You already briefly mentioned that in the beginning. And in your article, you also talked about data-based approaches that always win. So you need to get proof. What do you exactly mean by that?
Well, I guess, there are so many smart people out there who've built so many great frameworks. And I would always stick to them, use them. Obviously, it can be adapted to your needs, but you don't need to build everything from scratch, right? And that's what I mean by that. So take what's out there, use it. And when it comes to data, like I'm currently working on a product market fit module together with Joel Kapt from realgrowthhacking.com. Mm-hmm. So he's a coach, a growth coach, a growth hacking coach, and a great guy. And we're working on this topic, right? And just basically teaching people how to conduct a product market fit. And I guess that's a very good example, right? There are best practices, but there is usually very few data, right? So you cannot conduct a let's say a test with thousands of people or an interview with thousands of people. So you need to rely on few information. So you need to do it the right way. And especially when it comes to interviews and founders, that's a challenge because founders, they're so trained in selling their vision. They sell it all the time,
of course,
right? And this is the worst thing you can do in an interview, right? So you don't want to convince the other that your idea is great. You want to hear that your idea is not that great,
right?
Where you can optimize, right?
Yeah.
And the other issue founders have is they listen to compliments, and obviously people are polite, they say, oh, it's a great idea. And it's a great idea. Let's write that down, 10 of 10 said it's a great idea, but they just want to be polite, right?
Yeah.
So this is this kind of thing. So stick to those best practices, but know how to implement them. And that's mostly the challenge because you can read tons of blogs, right? And let's say OKRs, it sounds so easy, right? Let's agree on some objectives, some key results, but then you suddenly realize, okay, is this a key result or is this just an initiative, or does it really motivate my team? And then suddenly realize, no, it's probably not the right way. And then you run this for the first 3 months, and in the middle of those 3 months, you realize that it's just not working well, and then you do it another time, and it's already 6 months are gone, right?
Exactly.
So this is something, when you're using best practice, you might want to seek for help as well to implement them.
I also think that's also where a strong and diverse complementary management or leadership team comes in, right? I think there you will have better discussions to also make the better decision in the end, instead of just you trying to implement the framework you just read about for the first time.
Absolutely, yes, that's true. That's true.
Your fifth and last point is called listen to your gut feeling. Is that not a contradiction to the fourth point with the data-driven decision that you just mentioned?
And it is, obviously, but you sometimes just don't have this data, right? Yeah. And I'm referring actually more to this, like feeling if something goes wrong inside of the organization, and that is something you just feel, Let's say if a person is unhappy, or you probably first have a gut feeling, and then it's really worth to investigate, to talk to this person or to get some more information. But gut feeling is something powerful, and just believing in data is probably the wrong way because it's a mix, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes data tells you clearly what's right and what's wrong, and sometimes you just don't have the data, right?
Right.
But you need to make decisions anyway.
Has your gut feeling ever led you in the wrong direction?
Of course, yeah. Data as well, right?
Fair point. Yeah.
When it comes to data, it's not only crucial that you have the data, but it's crucial that you have the right data and understand it.
Right.
So, and this takes some time as well to it's best practice again, and how to implement it.
Yeah. Well, now we covered all the 5 points. I think those were super interesting learnings for the people listening to this. So now if you look a bit into the future, you just left your last CEO role and decided to work as a scale-up advisor. What actually led you to that step?
I guess it's probably the same thing that led me to being, or to the decision of being an entrepreneur. It's, I like to have impact. And, first of all, I realized, I don't want to jump in just the next year role again, just without, at least having some time for me to reflect. I talked to some companies, and I realized that it's really not the right time to just jump in. But what I saw as well is that and that kind of triggered me. There are a lot of things that can be improved in those organizations. So what I did is just I asked them, look, it's probably not the right time, and they probably don't even need a CEO. Mm-hmm. That's actually starting with that, right? And but I can help you. I can support you. Do you want to work with me on let's say some kind of consulting agreement or whatsoever?
Right.
And all of them said yes. So that led me to a decision to support, I would say, pre-scale startups, and with always the goal to get them ready for scaling, right? And this is what I'm currently doing. Even though I cannot say this is going to be my future,
sure.
So I'm still open for roles, but it's a very good thing to reflect on your past, to reflect on your practices, methodologies, and to actually read a lot as well again. I have the time now to learn a lot. And what I've been doing, because I realized I cannot work on a, let's say, on a consulting basis with early stage startup. Mm-hmm. So I realized, okay, I could work with them. I could have a lot of impact, but I need to, make it in a different way. So what I did is actually I wrote a manual for company building, where I'm writing currently. I'm on page 70. So it's getting huge. It's a monster that I'm creating. But it's a how to, nice. on all those kind of things, how to, create a strategy, how to implement it, how to implement OKRs, how to lead a company, how to communicate, and all those kind of things, everything that matters. And what I do with early stage startup, I make an assessment. Mm-hmm. And based on that assessment, I create an individual, a kind of version of that manual, and I lead them through that manual. So it's kind of a subscription basis. Obviously, I had to create something like that because I'm so trained in making something scalable, right? So and that's how it works. And I just started, but the feedback is very positive, and I can literally see impact from day one. And just because people start, even with the assessment, which is a funny thing, because people start reflecting, why does he ask that? I never thought of that, right? So and they just start reflecting and coming up with ideas.
That's the best to happen.
Yeah. And as well, I just train them basically to come up with ideas. If they have a certain goal, mm-hmm. I just want to hear usually I connect them with them on a bi-weekly basis for 1 hour, and looking back what happened in the past 2 weeks and brief them for the next 2 weeks. And then I can, of course, ask a lot of questions, about challenges and whatsoever. But I always ask them to come up with 2 ideas on how to solve this issue. Mm-hmm. And that just trains them to have it present all the time, and not, always be in stuff that is now important, but probably doesn't really add value to the whole organization.
Nice. Very cool approach. And you mentioned at the beginning the 10-year plan for the companies that you worked with. So I wonder, do you also have a personal 10-year plan?
No, I don't think so, because, well, I cannot answer that currently, because it's really, I take this time for me as well to think about my future. Yeah. And I tend to, probably found something on my own again. So I recently discussed that with Pascal Koenig, the founder of Ava, and we had lunch, and I told him, I don't know if I'm too old for that stuff. And he was like, Are you crazy? I mean, just think of, how your work changed, how much more impact you can have with less hours. So you're getting better and better. So why stop right now? And I was like, that's a good thing, right? And it's probably as well a good thing to create or to build your own thing again, after being a startup CEO for 8 years, I guess close to 8 years now. So to create my own thing again and implement my own values, right?
Sure.
And try to chase my own vision, basically. So that could be one of the solutions, but another could be as well entering in an organization again, but with a very clear shared responsibility. That's what I think is very important.
Definitely an exciting future ahead of you.
It is. Thank you.
So to wrap up this episode, we prepared some rapid fire questions for you. So I either give you a short question or an option where you have to make one choice and answer in one sentence. Are you ready?
Yep.
How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
8 hours, like almost every night. I'm not one of those supermen that sleep 4 hours, so I need my 8 hours.
I like to hear that. Meet market demand or create it?
I would say both.
Okay.
You need to meet a certain demand in order to be successful. So you cannot just create something that you probably only like yourself. So then that must be a market demand. So, but I always like when the first step is real innovation. So it really changes something dramatically, but then still need to adapt to the market.
Nice. Where do you go to think and reflect?
I go for a jog in the forest.
Nice. How long can you go without checking your phone?
What did you just say? I'm sorry, I'm just checking.
But that was already an hour, so.
Yeah, so every hour.
Fair point. Next one, I'm really curious what you say, founder or CEO?
I would, as I mentioned, probably rather founder or CEO of a company that really shares the values I like, right?
Yeah. And the last one for you today, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Learn more and less ego.
Nice. Boris, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for stopping by. We're really excited to see what you'll build in the future, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Dylan. It was a great pleasure to be here.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.